talk about one particular item. I want to be able to walk through what we're going to do to be able to solve it. Honestly, today, it's a little different for me. In some ways, I feel like a little bit like Will Rogers' famous statement, the famous Oklahoman. He said, all I really know is I learned from reading the newspapers, which is an alibi for my ignorance. Today, I want to just be able to talk about just random stories that I've read lately that are kind of in the you can't make this stuff up column. It's been frustrating to me. Right now, 7 in 10 Americans feel like America's on the wrong track. 7 in 10. I mean, I don't know why, but they just feel like something's not going right, that things are out of control. And it's been frustrating to me to be able to go through so many news stories lately and to be able to say, if I put this in front of 7 in 10 or maybe 9 of 10 Americans, they would say, why are we doing this as a nation? Now, I understand a lot of the issues we face are complicated. But quite frankly, some of these issues are not complicated. They're common sense. They become political only in this city. But for most of America, it's just not that complicated. And sometimes I just get frustrated with the language and the things that are coming out of not just the administration, but the things that are just happening in our federal government right now that I think you just need to be called out. And to say, let's, as a Senate, sit down and talk about some of these complicated issues. And instead of just knee-jerk political reactions, let's try to solve some of these hard things. Because we're currently talking about it and things are going sideways instead of things being solved. Over the past 5 days, we've watched the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in New York, a big bank in San Francisco, a much smaller bank in New York. Both of them, we've now had the FDIC step in, and they're going to save every single person in the bank and to be able to make sure they're whole. Now, that's very different than typical. Most Americans know you're insured up to $250,000, but the Biden administration stepped in and said, oh no, everyone's going to be kept 100% whole. The comment that's come out of it has been, well, we're going to make sure no taxpayers have to be able to cover this, though. And then if you listen closely, the very next statement is, it's going to come from an assessment on the banks instead. Now, let me tell you what that means. One of the wealthiest banks in America, that is mostly millionaires that actually bank there. In fact, to show that, 90% of the depositors in Silicon Valley Bank, their deposits exceed $250,000. Okay, 90%. That's not normal for a bank. In that bank in San Francisco, all of their depositors are going to be bailed out. And the way that they're going to be bailed out is they're going to put a special, what they're calling an assessment on banks across the country. So let me tell you what's happening in the next few months. Banks in Oklahoma, in rural towns, are about to pay a special fee to be able to bail out millionaires in San Francisco. Now, what Oklahoma banks and bankers had to do with that bank failure in San Francisco, I have no idea. But the comments being made over and over again, no taxpayer is going to be affected by this. I'm sure my bankers would be glad to know that they don't pay taxes anymore, apparently. And I'm sure every person that banks there will be interested to know when their bank fees go up and when their interest rates go down to be able to cover what happened in San Francisco. Now listen, I don't want to see a contagion of banks either, but let's be honest. What's really happening is a backdoor tax increase on every single American's just not using the IRS to do it, it's using community banks to do it all over the country. To charge them a quick higher fee, which they know will mean a higher fee to the people that are members of their banks. And that's how it's going to get covered. Rather than the typical way this would get covered by actually taking that bank, actually doing an auction, auctioning it off to other banks to be able to take it in. I look at that and say, you can't make this stuff up in some ways. To be able to say, no taxpayer is going to be affected, but quietly, taxpayers across the country are going to be affected by this.